thing we have is a big light. There's nothing like light. And examining a piece of furniture or painting, your eyes can only see so much. Sometimes you get raking light, sometimes you get light head on. It's amazing what you may not see with your naked eye. So we bring a really good light with us, or we have a really good little flashlight where we can crawl under furniture and look at things. And it's, I think there's a funny story. Many years ago, my mom was watching our shop, and there was a fellow who would buy things from us once in a while from New London. And she saw him looking under a piece of furniture. She said, "Eddie, what are you looking?" He said, "I don't know, everybody else does it." And he said, "I have no idea what I'm looking at. So I'd have to trust you guys, but there's got to be something you're looking at." So we crawl under furniture, and so these are the two things that we use a lot. Kevin, and I'm going to let Kevin talk about this one. This is great.
Yeah, this is one of our favorite tools and comes in handy. An extension mirror. When you want to get into certain areas of a piece of furniture, or if you're looking in the back of a desk, say to look at the valances on the inside of a desk, and you want to make sure they're original. And really what we're looking for is consistency. What you want to see in an antique piece of furniture is consistency of materials, consistency of construction, and consistency of age and oxidation. So what we're crawling around looking for is to see that everything matches. Little mirrors, magnifying glasses, even paper clips come in very handy from time to time when you're looking at a piece of furniture.
And two simple ones: magnifying glass, tape measure. Tape measure, like wood expands and contracts, but over time, wood always contracts. So if you have a round table that started in the 18th century as perfectly round, wood shrinks, it will be off. Could be off as much as a half an inch, 3/4 of an inch. So you measure it, and then you go 90 degrees the other way. And if you don't have a consistency of shrinkage, and that tabletop is still perfectly round, there has to be some kind of a reason why. I've seen it where great mahogany has not shrunk much, but that's really the exception rather than the rule.
Arthur, does the shrinkage go with or against the grain? Or does it matter?
It goes against the grain. So if the grain, let's see if we can, okay, the grain on this is going in this direction. So this will shrink very little. This is 15.5 inches. This is 14 7/8. So that top has shrunk 5/8 of an inch because this table top was exactly round when it was made, because it had to be. This was turned on a lathe. It had to be perfectly round. Otherwise, it would be like a record played in a record player that was totally whoop, 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 whoop. It had to be perfectly round to start. And over 200 years, wood shrinks. There's a you could probably see it. So today we're going to do tavern tables, lowboys, and Windsor chairs to start. And we're going to start with tavern tables. I'm going to show you an old versus new and how we tell. By the way, you'll be getting a test in the mail.
Of course, the first thing we start with is bright light.
So this table has a really classic Connecticut, Massachusetts, possibly Rhode Island. We call them tavern tables. They were also used in homes. The name tavern table was not just tables that they used in taverns. But this table, this is what we call a block and turn leg. So it's the style of a William and Mary period of, say, as early as 1710, maybe as late as almost 1760. When we say something was made around 1730, you have to go either way. That's like the middle of the bell curve, maybe 1730. But it's possible it could have been made in 1720, it could have been made in 1760. If a cabinet maker knew how to make a block and turn leg tavern table, and when he was 20 years old in 1730, and he liked this style, he may not have changed his style for 40 years. Maybe new styles came in, but he may not have changed and gone to the new style. It's like women's skirts. Just if somebody likes a certain length, they may not like going to the new style just because it's shown in the magazines or on the show, on the runway that this is the new style. So when we say 1730, that's like the sort of like the peak. And so that's approximately when this table was made, 1730, 1740, and it's all the elements are original. So we first look at the form. I was taught form is king. If it has a bad form, it could have the greatest patina, greatest color in the world. But if the form is bad, it's still bad. What you want to find is good form first, and then all the others is the frosting. So when we look at it, we say, hey, that's a pretty nice table. Got nice legs, nice proportions of turnings to the top, nice overhang, not too big, not too small. It just fits together really well. So then within a minute or two, we're already turning it over, because that's the proof of the pudding. And this table, and one of the new terms is called paint history. A table like this made in 1730, it's now almost 300 years old. There has to be, almost always, that table will be repainted once or twice in its life. That is what we call paint history now. And so rarely do you ever want to take any of the later layers off. It's not unusual to find a Windsor chair or a table like this to have 5 layers of paint on it. But then what you try to do is get down to the original. You sort of peek around, you put the flashlight on it, you put the big lights on it to see what the color is underneath and how the elements all match. They all started life together. The 4 sides started life together. The top started life together. Or is back to the shrinkage. And you're welcome to do this. These legs, just like the tabletop that we showed you, wood shrinks. So if you were to, and we can do this blindfolded now, but it took many years to learn. In order to turn this leg on a lathe, it had to be perfectly round, just like the top on the table. Otherwise, it's like a warped 78 record. And so it started life perfectly round, but as wood shrinks, it now is ovoid. And if you take your hand and you just don't squeeze tight, just let your hand glide around it.
I always thought that was from the wear.
No. There's no wear on the side of a leg. I mean, it would be really hard for somebody to wear the side of a leg. This ovoid is created because wood is virtually, probably 90% moisture. And if you were to dry this up entirely, it would be dust. But there's still a certain amount of moisture content in the tree, in the wood. And you can glide your hand across around these turnings, and you can feel that they're out of round. And the older it is, and also depending on the material. If this was Santo Domingo mahogany, really dense mahogany, it would have very little shrinkage. It would be there, but it'd be very small amount. Made out of maple, it has a certain amount of shrinkage. Made of pine, Native growth pine, it probably would have, because it's a soft wood, it would have a greater tendency of shrinkage. So that is critical. That's one of the first things we look at.
And I guess, and along with the shrinkage, and one of the important other indicators of age is oxidation of the wood. And wood, as wood ages, it adopts a really specific color, this really beautiful warm reddish brown color. And that's an important color to learn. This whole underside of the top really has that warm reddish brown tone, is the natural color of aging wood. And these elements have all been together for over 200 years. They should all match, they should all be consistent and warm rosy brown. When you start to see other colors of blackish, grayish, sometimes you see a haze, generally that's a stain or something that's trying to mask problems with the oxidation, problems with the consistency. So you look throughout all the elements of the piece, they all should be consistent and all should have this beautiful, warm, kind of nutty brown, reddish color to it. And that is an important color to learn, and you really only learn it by looking over and over at the underside of pieces and looking for that same consistent color.
I'm going to jump in and tell you, one of the first things I ever learned, the first thing Kevin learned, is Antiques 101 furniture, the scratch test. When Kevin was just talking about the natural oxidation of wood, natural aging, caused by the aging of the wood, the smoke in the room, whatever the environment of what that piece of furniture lived in, that oxidation is only on the surface of the wood. It does not go into the wood. So you take your fingernail and you scratch it. You literally scratch it. And I'm going to show you right here. Hopefully everybody can see it. Can you see it, girls? Okay, watch what happens when I scratch this. You see it leaves a white mark? If you all see that? If that was stained and made to look artificially old, you can scratch it and it doesn't leave a mark. It just doesn't, because the stain sinks in like ink into the wood. You can't scratch it with just a little scratch of your fingernail. And just that little scratch with virtually no pressure leaves a scratch. 101, the scratch test. Yes?
So the cleat looks a lot darker outside of the base than inside.
You mean here?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's coming from?
Okay. When they painted, so the table's all done, ready to go to market. You have to remember, these people, these cabinet makers were making a living. They wanted to make their object as saleable as they could. So paint was popular at the time. So once the table is all made, then they paint it. Paint it black, paint it red. If their customer was really picky and wanted powder blue, they got powder blue. But in most cases, it would be red in the 18th century in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Why would they leave this unpainted? It's going to be seen, probably, but they're not going to see it on the inside. So they painted this to almost the same color as the top. Not in every case, but in most cases. Now also, obviously, when you're spilling stuff on the table and you're sponging it down constantly with a wet rag or a sponge or whatever they used in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, the top is going to have a different color. It's going to be warm. It's going to be smooth. It's going to be really smooth. We once sold a table to some people and we called it the baby bottom table because that top was like silk. It was just unbelievable. It was just like touching silk. And it was hard maple. And because it was rubbed so many times over 300 years, it really was just amazingly soft. So you're not going to have the exact same color here as you would on the top, because how often would somebody bother to clean the bottom of the table? When milk spills, it doesn't often get underneath.
It looks like both the base and the top have been repainted many times.
Yeah.
And the bottom have not been touched.
What happened, this is the original red wash that is used. The black paint is not the original color. It wasn't painted, it was probably with a red wash. And you can see that actually where some of the paint chips have come off. You can see that red wash as the primary paint surface. So what you're seeing outside the frame and on the underside of the table is the original red wash. As Arthur said, once the table was finished, they painted most of the table, saving the paint on the inside. It was a valuable commodity. And so when this table was painted black, it was also painted white at some point in its life. The underside of the top was not repainted with those later paints.
Do you think the original table was used with that red wash on top?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so, and you know, another thing, I mean, we could actually teach a whole course just on this table, really. Honest to God, I mean, we could spend a whole day just dissecting this one table, but obviously we're not going to do that to you. But, for instance, you see the stretchers? That's where so many feet went and wore, because like back in the 18th century, this is an old table. Rarely do your feet ever get right up against the side of the leg and the stretcher. So you're going to find a certain amount of more wear generally in the middle than you will on the ends. That's part of the forensics. But if you start to see where we think it's artificial wear, that's when we start to get a little, you know, wary. Why? And they shouldn't necessarily be all the same on all four stretchers. Sometimes they are, but sometimes the cabinet makers who try to fake go a little beyond, and there's nothing like the real natural aging. You can't fake it.
Yeah, and wear and patina are certainly an important indicator of an important tool that you want to use when judging your antique. Something that's 200 years old, 300 years old should show some of that age somewhere.
All right, so now this is a reproduction. This was probably made about 50 years ago, maybe 75 years ago, by somebody who was really talented. Made a really nice table. And there again, it's called a tavern table with what we call block and turn legs. I tried to find one, you know, that's as similar to this as we could today. But you see the color underneath here? It doesn't have that really warm, rosy, deep, penetrating color. It's just like artificial color. And there I'm going to give you the scratch test. I'm going to show you that because it has not aged like this yet, it takes years and years to get that mellow color. And sometimes in order to pre-age it, a cabinet maker will put stain on that penetrates the wood. And can you all see? Nothing happens. It doesn't scratch like the other table did, that natural color. It just isn't there. It will have a little because it's already 75 years old, but it doesn't have that, you know, that automatic, wonderful rosy color. Shrinkage. If you come up here later, and you're welcome to put your hand on that, it doesn't even have any shrinkage yet. It's still as perfectly round as the day it was turned. And the wear in the bottom of the feet. Think of this. 18th century houses, damp, no dehumidifiers, and cold in the winter, humid in the summer. And where did the wear go? Mostly on the bottom of the feet, where they wicked up moisture into the bottom of the feet, so that the bottom of the feet gets cracked, it checks, it soaks up moisture from the floor. And the closer it is to the outside of the house, the more moisture it's going to get. If this was in the middle of the room near a fireplace, it would be dry, you wouldn't get as much moisture. You put this against an outside wall for 200 years, you're going to tend to get a little more, we call erosion. And there's virtually none here. There's no checking of the wood, which you'll see if we'll leave these upside down. You can come over and see later. So, this is examination of a William and Mary lowboy and a Queen Anne lowboy. And I'm not going to say, you know, test you and say, which one do you think is the real one? Because this William Mary lowboy is one of my favorite pieces. It's one of the rarest forms that exists. William Mary lowboys just are so, so rare. And so that took a cabinet maker. This was made around 1730, 1740. And it is inherently a weak form because these stretchers weaken the leg. It holds the legs, but also it weakens it because the feet were slipped on after the leg was turned. And so we're only using this to show you the aging factor from when we look underneath. There's that rosy color that Kevin spoke about. That, and I'll do the scratch test again. See how easy it scratches. That aging color is just so rich in there that it just comes right off. And what you want to find is, like Kevin said before, consistency. We want to see consistency of the color of the runners, and the color of the bottoms of the drawers, and the color of the backboard, and the color of the sides, and the color of the apron on the inside. And that's what we're looking for, because this table has lived all its parts together in the same dirty house, or the same clean house, or the same back bedroom all its life, or at least part of its life. And I will tell you, it's very interesting little history. Since about 1930, this lowboy has been owned by 4 of the most prominent dealers through the years, because everybody loves it and nobody ever wanted to sell it. So they would keep it for themselves for a while, and then after a while they would sell it, and then it went to another dealer, and then it went to another. So we're now like the 5th dealer who have owned this. Unfortunately, I would love to keep it, but it's a cash flow business. So we're going to show you, we'll turn up the other lowboy, but can everybody see this pretty well?
If you took out one of the drawers,
Okay.
would the color be different on the
Okay.
underside?
All right, so we're going to pull out one of the drawers and to see if there's a change in the color. Now, the underneath of the top has been protected because dirt and smoke hasn't gotten there yet. The smoke can't really get in there. So it should be lighter. And if you can see, you see the difference in the color from the underneath of the top to the color of the bottom of the drawers. Okay, right. You see, in the center of that drawer, you see the line down the middle where it's lighter? Okay, so watch where it goes. It slides down, and you see how it's being protected. That drawer runner is now protecting it from the air. So that strip down the middle did not get darker because the smoke and the dirt, which I keep repeating myself, but it's really true, didn't get there. And there it is. And you see the backboard? See how it's lighter where the drawer goes? Right back here. It's lighter because the drawer goes right to the back, and so same reason. Everybody is that all computing? Okay. Okay, so this is a reproduction that was made by our cabinet maker who worked for our family for 50 years, and he gave this to my wife and I when we got married 37 years ago. So this is 37 years old. And you see there's no age to the color. This is chestnut. And he had to cut, even though it's old wood. And what he did is he actually copied a lowboy that my father had at the time. He made an exact copy out of old wood. This is 200-year-old wood, but it doesn't have, because he had to recut the boards, it has not aged yet. It doesn't have that warm color yet. That takes so many years to get. And so, you see there's no change in color yet, because, well, our house isn't there. But if you were, the scratch test, you see it scratches a little bit because it actually is 35 years old now, but it doesn't have the same depth of color. This is the real McCoy. This is a Pennsylvania Windsor, one of the most successful forms in a chair ever. Andy Warhol was a wonderful collector of American antiques. And he was once asked, what is the purest American form? And he said, the Windsor chair. And because there was an embryo in England, but when they came here, they redesigned it, made it totally different. And the American Windsor chair, which was a utilitarian object, was an incredible survivor. This chair is, and you're welcome to come and sit on it, you don't have to worry about it, was made in Pennsylvania probably around 1780, 1790, and it is remarkable in that it was used, there are many different types of woods that were in the chair. They used maple, tulip poplar, chestnut. Those are usually the choices of woods. The spindles are usually hickory or ash. The wood that they make baseball bats out of, because it's the toughest wood, sometimes oak. The crest rails and the turnings of the legs are usually maple, because it's the easiest wood to turn. So what they would do is they would make a chair, and the wood was green. It was literally just cut recently. It was not dry wood. And they would put the chair together, and then it all shrinks together as a one unit. And they would wedge the pins coming through the leg, and they would use high glue, and that's it. No, rarely are there nails. Occasionally there's pins, but these legs are just held in by virtually glue and wedges. And it's a remarkable bit of engineering. And in most cases, Windsor chairs are in perfect working order. I'm going to get one right here. This is the highest development in a Windsor chair because it had an upholstered seat. The upholstered seat was actually more valuable and more expensive than the wooden seat because it cost more for the fabric than it did to have the chair made. Clothes were more expensive than furniture. And so the same goes true on the furniture. For every 1,000 Windsor chairs, there's one that's upholstered. Maybe for every 2,000 Windsor chairs. That's how rare. And we have a set of 6 right now. And what we did was when we got these, we found remnants of the original fabric. And that, we had it made in London, outside of London. We matched the original type of fabric and the color. And that's exactly what that chair had originally and the chair was green. The chair was actually painted the same color as the seat. It was all that color. So there again, the turnings, just like on the original tavern table, the turnings are ovoid. And there is shrinkage, and there's aging to the wood. And there's paint loss and cobwebs. Cobwebs, and that's our website. And so it's when we show you now the copy of, Kevin will hold up the copy.
Is there ever any paint on that Philadelphia chair?
Yes. Windsor chairs were almost entirely always painted. Always. Yeah, you see it has like a red. I don't know if you can see that, but you're welcome to come up and look at it later. Windsor chairs, again, were usually red, yellow, blue, green. Green was a very common color. But the reason they were painted is because the legs were maple, the seats were chestnut or pine. There were many choice of different types of wood. It didn't all match. So what they did is they painted the whole chair. But what happened is, through the years, the paint got a little ratty looking, so we said, oh, let's just take the paint off. The difference in value today in a Windsor chair that has the original paint versus one that's refinished is dramatic. This chair is $27,500. If it still had the original paint and it was red, it would be $50,000 to $60,000. And because this is a very, very great form in Windsor chair. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 9. They don't get much better than this. This was made in Philadelphia around 1780. In Ace. That's as good, almost as good as they come.
And although this is one of those cases where, although the paint has been removed, it was removed such a long time ago, and this beautiful brown varnished surface has aged so well, that it kind of moderates that loss of value because of the paint loss. The beautiful wear and patina to the crest and the back of the spindles, the insides of the arms. They just have that really natural, really honest patina and glow and real kind of antique feel to it.
One of the things that my father taught me was that back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, old paint was not popular. People did not want old ratty looking painted furniture. They just didn't. You couldn't sell it. You couldn't give it away. So my grandfather, my father carried a pocket knife with them. And if they found a painted piece, they would scrape it in the house to see what it would look like when they got home. They would have it refinished. And my father said, hey, you can condemn me, put me in jail. He said, we refinished a lot of furniture because nobody wanted it. This interest in the original paint surface started probably around the 50s, the early 50s, when museums and dealers and collectors started to say, you know, there's something charming about the original paint. And then the whole pendulum swung back. And so we're at the extreme of the pendulum right now. If this is an absolutely fabulous chair. Great, great form. If this, literally, if this had old red paint on it, you could $75,000, $100,000 in a second. It actually would sell faster for $75,000 or $100,000 than it would being refinished for $27,500, because there are so few examples that still are out there that are untouched. The top collectors are demanding, they want the original surface, and they're just not out there. They're either in collections, they're in museums. Occasionally one will show up and come out of the woodwork, but it's far and few between. So, you know, I'm learning too. I'm, you know, a good teacher in an elementary or high school will always admit that they learn all the time. And so I'm sure that you people all have something I can learn from regarding this stuff, not only about your own fields, but there's always, Kevin and I yesterday going to Christie's and examining some major pieces of furniture. We learned something yesterday. I mean, we actually, you know, it's fascinating to see what we see. And, you know, if people trailed behind us on a daily basis, you would see that it's a constant learning experience. And that's how I learn, because I love this stuff. Okay, this reproduction is actually a Wallace nutting. You might have heard about Wallace nutting. Wallace nutting was a pioneer collector in the teens. And he practiced his collecting and dealing here mostly in Connecticut and Massachusetts. There underneath is a label from Wallace Nutting, from his factory. And today these are collectible because they're really well made, they're really good wood. He imitated a lot of the original construction techniques, but he just expanded upon it a little too much. And there again, if you come around, you're going to feel there's no shrinkage. The aging of the wood is not there yet. The erosion, the wear factor, the shrinkage factor, all that what makes the aging obvious on a chair like this or the chair like this one